Welcome to Your Property Fix, your regular bit of free education from Alison and I, making sure that you as property investors are doing as well as you can be, whilst also maintaining compliance. So, one of the big things that is part of yourselves being a landlord or being a property investor is the rent that you're charging and charging the right rent. Now, as we know, there's different situations that occur for different types of investors, different stages, different property journeys as such, and that will impact upon the way you'll pitch, where your rent will be and where realistically it should be, and where you want it to be and where realistically it can be. So what are the things we're going to be trying to cover through today, Alison?
So we're going to talk about obviously getting that right rent from day one. It's really, really important. So voids will cost you more than maybe just pricing it that little bit lower. But at the same time, you want to obviously achieve the maximum return that you can for your property. So we're going to be covering a bit about that, how to set your market rent. We're going to be talking about when you've had a tenant for a little while and what you can do to increase the rent, the process you need to go through. But our focus as well today is on the Renters' Rights Bill.
And the RRB, the big one that's coming.
Yeah, and how that's going to kind of impact on rent increases. What sort of rent control measures are going to be coming in as part of the Renters' Rights Bill, which is now getting closer. I think October now we're looking at when that's going to come in. So yes, some changes in respect of rent increases are coming.
So for different landlords, we come across different landlords in different situations all across every day of the month, have got a rental property, and you've got your seasoned landlords that know, as you've already said already, voids cost more than getting the optimum, as high as possible rent that you can possibly achieve. And do bear this in mind, realistically, property's empty for a period of time. If it's a full property, you've got your council tax. You know, it may well be you've got certain criteria, and insurance may well be that if it's empty, you may well pay a premium for that. In addition to that, obviously, if you're not getting rent, the longer period you've got that rent for, what could you have been achieving if it was full? And if you've got that slightly lesser rent, that, you know, how much you're getting over a 12-month period, all these different things to consider. And now with regards to when you're trying to pitch that rent, there may be some investors that come along that are new to the game that say, right, well, I've done my finance, I need to achieve this much. And it happens quite a bit, doesn't it? And Alison will expand on a story. We've got one particular one in a moment that came along and said, you know, I want this amount of rent. And I mean, if you want to expand on it, go on, expand the story.
Yeah, so I was got a call from a landlord, and he had his property on the market with another agent in the city. It'd been on for a while. He'd got 5 rooms, newly refurbished, and they're just not letting. And I thought, well, this sounds a bit sus because, you know, obviously there is good agents and bad agents, but usually any newly refurbished property, whether it's a full property or rooms, they usually let really quickly. So I thought,
it was in a fairly reasonable demand. It wasn't the hot spot, but it was in. No. You could see there'd be plenty of demand because it was quite close to a business estate, wasn't it?
And anyway, I said, oh, well, what viewings have you had? And we haven't had any viewings. Thinking, this is mad. No viewings.
And the big question.
It's like, oh, what rents are you charging, or what rents you've got it on at? And it was something like £750 for an ensuite, and I was like, in the area.
Well, there are some.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. There are some really high-end ensuites, larger, that maybe are going. I think they're still pushing it. I haven't seen many ensuites. Kind of studios, perhaps more so. So I thought this is way too high, and obviously for the area, you wouldn't be getting full whack in that area for. The
economies of scale is always the key thing, isn't it? If you've got lesser demand, it's going to drill down on the price that you're going to be able to achieve. And in some cases, I know when people come to me on occasions about sourcing properties, and they say, "Oh, I'm looking in such and such an area," and I say, "Well, economies of scale, you're not going to have as much demand, so that may well impact upon the price that you're going to be able to achieve." But yeah, of course.
Yeah. So from this point of view, this case study, I just obviously gave the landlord straight. You know, if you want me to advertise it, it won't be at £750. I don't particularly like putting properties on that are just going to sit there and not do anything. It's a waste of my time, it's a waste of that landlord's time. So I was very straight with him over what he could achieve. I think we were achieving between kind of 525 and 550 for the rooms, which were quite small rooms as well, in that particular area. So way off what he was hoping to get or what he'd worked out his numbers for.
It was London based, wasn't it?
He was based in London. He hadn't actually viewed the property before he purchased it. He'd looked at it on a map and seen some like good, obviously, business opportunities. Over by Coventry Airport. So there was obviously some retail parks, there was business parks around the area. So you kind of based that decision and that purchase on, you know, there being that demand. And in reality, there just wasn't that demand, not at the prices that he was wanting.
And we had the place full within a couple of weeks. It was very quick, and obviously the fact of the people having to give notice and moving, you know, from other properties or when they're coming to the area. But it was full, and I says, well, what? And another avenue you can look at. Okay, from now on, you've got that property full. It may not be getting quite as much as you're wanting to get from the start. However, when it comes to renewing, which we'll come on to a little bit later on, when it comes to renewing those tenancies or new tenancies. Because when a property's empty, it's losing an awful lot of money. But if you've got people in there, maybe one or two people, they move out, but you then charge that higher rent when you've got people in there, proof of what sort of levels you can achieve, that will minimise the voids that you're going to be getting. So they're key things to consider in the fact of getting a property full at a reasonable rent. Maybe if it's lower than you want it to be, is more important than getting that optimum rent from the start, particularly when it's empty. And when a property's coming up for, you know, a renewal, you obviously want it to be putting it a little bit higher with the fact that rents are going up each and every year. The rents are higher than they've ever been, which is fantastic. So moving on, so we've got the tenants in there. What I think is really important, what sort of periods and timescales and what sort of increases should we be now thinking we can be getting and when?
Yeah, so really it's every year you can look to review the rent, and that's obviously going to be that's all that we do it. We won't do it any more than every 1 year. Under the Renters' Rights Bill, that will be the only way, every year. Obviously, if a tenant leaves and vacates and that property comes back to the market, that's different. You can alter the rent then. But for that same tenant, once per year are going to be the rules. And the only way that you'll be able to do that is by giving 2 months' notice under the Renters' Rights Bill. At the moment, it's 1 month's notice. So that is increasing. And it has to be a Section 13 notice under the Renters' Rights Bill. So at the moment, we've got a few options. We can increase that rent at renewal stage.
Because that's important to emphasise, is once a tenant commits to, for example, a 6-month tenancy, well, you can't do anything within that first 6 months anyway. So once they come, for example, if it's the second 6 month, or they're doing a 12-month tenancy, if it's 2 6-month tenancy, at the end of that second 6 month tenancy, it's only at that point when they've come out of that fixed period, because you're contractually saying that is your rent.
Yeah.
When it comes to the end of that, you can then obviously then do the price increases, the different routes you're talking of.
Yeah, so you can obviously do at the moment, at the renewal stage. You can have a rent clause in your agreements at the moment, so it can specify something like your rent will increase by such and such percent every year. So it can, there's a few ways of doing it at the moment, but going forward, the only way that you will be able to increase the rent under the Renters' Rights Bill is through a Section 13 notice, which that's the process that we tend to go through now anyway, because we feel that, you know, in the long run that's better for a landlord. It's got offers that little bit more security that the rent increase will happen. So a Section 13 notice is a government form that you need to serve on your tenant, and as part of that will give them ways to dispute the rent increase if they wish. So I think communication is really, really important here. And when we're doing rent increases, it's important to kind of look at the market and just check that, you know, you are keeping with that. You won't necessarily get kind of a big increase every year, or, you know, an increase even every year. And you may wish, some landlords may wish to just keep it slightly under.
That's the nice thing, because if you've got good tenants, I know it's one thing, not landlords. So for example, if it's going to go up by, I don't know, £100 or £75, so look, And what can be a way that you wish to justify what you're doing? You say, look, here's other properties that are available at the moment. This is the sorts of rents that they're going at. But feasibly, I'm going to put yours up by this much. And as a goodwill gesture, this isn't quite as much. But here's the thing, and this is the reason why the marketplace is like it is at the moment. There's not so many people moving because they're realising if they stay where they are, they're likely to pay a little bit less. And if they're happy where they are, and they're happy staying there with it convenient from what their reason there for as a family, for example, they'll stay where they are because it's far more convenient. But the fact that it's that little bit less than moving elsewhere, and this is one thing that we're finding with the market at the moment. There's less voids, which is great. Landlords are loving it. Rents are higher than they've ever been. Yes, they may well be that little bit lower, but justifying why you're putting that rent up, it's all reasonable. Now, the tenant says, I'm not happy. I don't like that rent increase. What's the process here?
So obviously the Section 30 notice, it gives them how they can dispute it. I mean, they can obviously come back and, you know, sometimes you do get a tenant that you've put it up to maybe 950 and they'll say, oh, can we agree on 925? And you may wish to do that. You may wish to have that conversation and try and come to an amicable agreement. And of course you are still going to be able to do that under the Renters' Rights Bill. However, if you are not wanting to negotiate and that tenant is not wanting to accept it, they have an option to go to what is called a first tier tribunal. Now, this isn't new under the Renters' Rights Bill. They can do this now. First tier tribunal cases happen now. I think in the last 12 months or a period from 2023 to 2024, I had a statistic that there was 868 disputes.
Although you wouldn't know by the amount of time it takes them to go through.
No, I think the average time was about 17 weeks for those 868 over the course of a year to go through. So not many going through, a lengthy process, but basically the tenant goes to the tribunal and it's a middleman basically that sits in the middle and says whether that increase is right.
It's like the ombudsman almost.
Or wrong. Yeah. And at the moment they can say, yep, that landlord is absolutely justified in what he is proposing and we agree with him. They can say, nope, the tenant is justified in saying it should stay the same and they can agree with them. They can actually increase what the landlord says, and actually, you know, the landlord's been really generous here, and he's saying 950, but it's really worth 1,000, and they can increase it. Under the Renters' Rights Bill, they are going to be removing that last option, but in reality, I do question how often that was ever used, how often that ever happened.
I think they can. Is there an occasion when they can actually throw it out as well and say, look, you know, without even going into a question on this, am I right in saying that, or is it a case it always has to go to investigation and tribunal? And
I think each side presents their case, and it doesn't necessarily go to any form of hearing. It can be stopped before that, but it, like I say, it is a lengthy process. There isn't many of them happening now. But what the Renters' Rights Bill is, because they're removing that top option, that it could be increased even further, there's less risk for the tenants to dispute their rent.
And what was the other thing that was coming in as well? Am I right in saying that if you say to your tenant, right, I'm pushing your rent up, and they say, no, I'm disputing it, that it won't go up until the tribunal have made the decision? Am I right in saying that?
So that's another quite negative thing that's not actually being talked about that much for the Renters' Rights Bill, is that if you're giving your notice, so come November, you're giving your notice that the rent will increase in January, and that tenant disputes the rent increase, it will then go to tribunal, which at the moment, like I say, it's taken approximately 17 weeks. I see that increasing because I see cases increasing. So you're looking at about 4 months where that process will take. So you're looking at April, May time before that decision's made. So currently the situation is that decision will be backdated to when you were originally proposed. So it would be backdated to January. What's going to happen under the Renters' Rights Bill is it won't be backdated. It will be on the decision of that tribunal. So potentially that decision could be delayed further. So in reality, as a tenant, there's
negotiate. So I think one thing that's important to highlight here for you now, before we come to an end on this podcast, is people say, well, okay, well, I'm charging such and such. What sort of rent increase is reasonable? Because they've been living there now the year. It's their first year they've lived in the property. And I would say, you know, if let's say, for example, a double room or an ensuite, we're talking, you know, between £25 and £50 a month increase. Would you be saying that's about right?
Not necessarily. I think I think over the past kind of 5-6 years, we've seen rents rise steadily. I think in the last couple of years they've risen dramatically. I would say that is levelling out now, and I think you have to do your research. You have to look into the market, speak with your letting agent, have a look what else is out there.
And what about full properties as well? So let's say £1,000 property. Are we talking £100 a month? That's 10% increase. Are we talking £50 a month? Again, you're going to have to do your comparables or whatever else, and also the type of tenants that you're letting to.
There's no kind of standard rule.
But don't just do it for the sake of doing it and do it for a tenner or a fiver. It's just not worth doing. However,
my advice would be to have that review every year. And even if you decide, actually, I'm going to keep it the same, make a point of communicating that with your tenant and say, you know, I've actually had a look and, you know, it is priced fair in the market. You know, if you were to leave this property, the price would probably be higher. Yeah. But on this occasion, I'm going to hold the rent
and I think
this time. It's having that communication, getting your tenants used to having that increase every year.
Not normalising it, and this is the thing. I know we've got some tenants that we've dealt with that are with landlords, private landlords, and they says, I'm trying to get these tenants out, but they can't seem to find anywhere else that they're looking for. Says, well, I'm not surprised you've been charging them too little, and they're having to go through this process, normalising what the rents are. A reality check.
They're trapping their tenant by not increasing the rents. You're trapping it. And
so you're doing them a favour by putting the rents in the way you want to see it.
I know that's probably quite a controversial statement, but
come on.
In a way you are, and it is kind of normalising that. And a kind of £30, £50 increase every year is better
per
than...
month, that is, obviously.
Yeah, per month. Done every year is going to be better than after 3 years suddenly doing like a £200 increase. Having those smaller increments is going to be more manageable for your tenants. So I'd really take on board that. And like I said, you don't have to increase it, but I would still have that conversation and explain. Every year I review my rents, and
as we always say, document everything that you do. Proof of everything. So I hope this has been of real help for you today. This is your Property Fix, your free education to make sure that you're being as successful as you can be, making those properties work as hard as they possibly can do for you whilst maintaining compliance. So make sure you're liking, you're following all the bits we need to be doing, and we'll look forward to seeing you on next time's podcast.